Hello, my name is Sorin Matei. I'm a professor of communication at Purdue University, and I'm here to refute the myth that science and stories need two different types of thinking. The belief that science is only about facts and stories are only about fiction relies on a false distinction. In fact, science is story ready. All scientists are, if not born, at least made storytellers. Let me back up my claim with a few good stories. Here goes the first one. Once upon a time, a king and queen lived a merry life in their kingdom, but alas, they had no children. Despite their many prayers and the potions they drank, they remained barren. An old midwife heard of their suffering and sent word that she can help. The queen hastened to meet the woman, who gave her a charmed linden bow to put under the pillow before going to bed, promising she would bear a child in no time. The queen did so and promptly fell pregnant. It was a custom in the kingdom that if a midwife helps beget a child, she should be lavishly awarded. Yet, the queen pretended she never heard of the midwife when asked to pay the reward. Then, let us stop here. What you just heard sounds like, and is, the beginning of a story. Yet, is it a real story or simply a linear series of events? This distinction depends on what follows. If the queen ignores the request and the midwife keeps quiet, this story is nothing more than a narration. Nothing of consequence really happened. More importantly, nothing we know about queens or midwives changes. Our expectations are neither challenged nor changed. Queens are noble-born and powerful. Midwives are born in meager circumstances and have little power. Ordinary people are ignored in medieval times. This is what common people have suffered throughout history. The story I just told you, if it ended with the queen's continued pride, would be a historical fact, but not compelling storytelling. However, what if, after being ignored, the midwife sent, let's say, a bat messenger to the queen in the middle of the night? Suddenly, what we thought we knew about the queen and the midwife changes. The midwife behaves like a supernatural being. She has magic powers. She's no low-born woman. In a word, she violates our expectations, as does her behavior. The bat episode may trigger new actions. What if the bat told the queen that she wouldn't be able to carry the pregnancy to term unless she performs 3 tasks? Now, this is a true story. Here's the difference. A story violates expectations and proposes a new understanding of how the world works. Now, sometimes stories use extraordinary effects to explain what just happened. However, not all stories need to be supernatural to be stories. Stories may violate expectations in trivial ways, but are stories nonetheless. Let us imagine this new scenario. A mail carrier approaches a house and rings the bell. A dog barks inside the house. The mail carrier, woof, barks back. Now, is this a story? Of course it is. Why? The mail carrier just violated your expectations about her role. She's not supposed to bark at dogs. A mail carrier is supposed to put the letters in the letterbox, or at best to ask if anyone is at home. However, since the letter carrier did something unexpected, the question that you, the audience, probably asked was, what might have reasonably led her to do that? The answers, or alternative explanations that we can propose, are many. The mail carrier knows the dog, is returning to her home. Or she's not a mail carrier at all, but a burglar trying to ingratiate herself with the dog. To get at the point, stories always need a before and after that adds something new to what we already know. Thus, the natural connections between the before and the after, a term known as causality, need to be violated and replaced with new explanations. Furthermore, by providing new explanations, stories teach. In brief, for a story to be a story, it must surprise the audience with an unexpected explanation for processes that the audience believes they already understood. In doing so, a story teaches. All good, strong storytelling teaches, and teaching by storytelling changes the world. Thinking about storytelling this way reveals something important about knowledge in general. New knowledge is story ready. Because of this, scientific discoveries are exceptional stories, since by definition, they violate assumptions and teach us new things. Here's one fitting example of a great scientific story. For millennia, if you ask people, what does the sun do? They will tell you that it revolves around the earth to provide warmth. Thus, according to the ancients, the earth was in the center of the universe. This explanation, however, was not a figment of their imagination. It was rooted in empirical observation. It was enough to spend a day in the sun to notice that it was the sun that moved around you, not the other way around. It took some time for humans to notice that although the sun and the stars did seem to move across the sky, some heavenly objects, many quite bright, followed random paths. Fittingly, these objects were called planets, a Greek word that translates as wanderers. Mars, Jupiter, or Venus moved strangely across the horizon, at times with the sun, at times against its path. The ancients thought that the movement of the planets was ordained by the gods to signal their will. Thus, they attempted to read divine will using calculations called horoscopes. However, after a while, scholars like Copernicus or Galileo, using data gathered by the previous generations, including for horoscopes, proposed that it might be in fact the Earth that moves around the sun. Similarly, the planets might not be anything else but Earth-like bodies that also move around our sun at speeds and trajectories that are different from our own. Mathematical calculations based on careful observations show that all the apparent vagaries of the wanderers were optical illusions. The same was true for the sun too. Its movement was no more real than the illusion we experience when waiting on a train. We think we have started moving only to realize that it is the train next to us that has in fact left the station. Now suddenly the old explanation, Earth is the center of the universe, was violated. And more important, a new explanation for the puzzling vagaries of planets was offered. Two birds were hit with one stone. The history of science is brimming with such events. In fact, by definition, science thrives on originality and expectation subversion. In turn, science constantly violates expectations and proposes new explanations that move humanity closer to knowing more about the universe. Scientific stories need, however, more than insights. They demand data. Science is the rigorous analysis of data to discern new causal patterns. For example, 100 years ago, heart attacks were seen as either accidents or the product of old age. For many generations, the relationship between eating right, artery disease, and heart attacks was unknown. In fact, being plumpy was a sign of health in some cultures. It took many years of research to realize that eating a lot of saturated fat, such as that found in lard, cheese, or some meats, and general overindulgence can thicken and block heart arteries. This leads to heart blockages and death. One researcher, Ancel Keys, realized this by comparing the diets of Americans of Northern European descent and Japanese people. Although both sample populations were laborers, the Northern Americans had much higher heart attack rates. The cause? The Northern American diet was too rich in cholesterol, provided by fat. Ancel Keys' insight was further validated by the data when he observed that the US-based Japanese population that switched to European American diet developed heart disease at higher rates. The relationship between science and stories, however, is not a one-way street. It is not only that good science makes good stories, but good stories can lead to scientific progress. Let us take the story of treating breast cancer. Due to prudishness, breast cancer was a taboo subject until a few decades ago. Furthermore, as a kind of cancer that an excision can take out, surgical procedures were preferred, even if they did not cure the illness. Thus, few talked about breast cancer, and when it was a topic of conversation, it was a very private matter of intimate surgery. Although easier to detect and treat than other tumors, breast cancer had a relatively high fatality rate. As recently as the 1960s, only 1 in 4 women survived more than 10 years after diagnosis. During the 1970s, however, something changed. More and more women, including highly visible figures such as the actress Shirley Temple Black and First Lady Betty Ford, publicly discussed their struggles with breast cancer. This spurred public interest in the lack of attention given to breast cancer. Furthermore, the public story challenged the ignorance of the past. Some proposed that more can be done, including therapy, to increase the rate of survival and even cure for breast cancer. This led to more research, more funding, and more scientific progress. Currently, more than 80% of women diagnosed with cancer survive more than 10 years. A research project conducted by Corbett and Mori showed that over 30 years, 1960 to 1990, extended media coverage led to a virtuous circle, generating more funding and research, which spawned more media coverage. We started with a definition of storytelling that focused on violating expectations. Who would have thought that stories are not only intimately connected to science, but can also change the world? We found that new explanations attract public attention and teach, unveiling the mechanism that turns narratives into remarkable stories. Then we discovered that moving the mountains of all beliefs with new findings is specific to data analysis and science in general. The conclusion should be simple. All scientists are natural storytellers. Never tell anyone, if you are a scientist, that all you care about are the facts. What you should really care about is the story.